Maggie Thompson had always believed that her home held the safest secrets. At 67, she knew the value of patience, the weight of silence, and the sharp sting of memories that refused to fade. On a quiet suburban evening, she sat on her porch, her knitting needles moving in rhythm with her thoughts. The sunset painted the house in gold, but Maggie's eyes were drawn to the driveway. There was a car approaching, familiar, yet unsettling in its timing. It was Laura, her eldest daughter. Maggie's heart tightened as she watched Laura step out, bags in hand. She moved briskly, avoiding Maggie's gaze, yet her tension betrayed her. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," Laura said, her voice carrying a practiced calm. Henry Thompson, Maggie's husband, shuffled to the door. At 70, he had grown gentler over the years, preferring quiet evenings to conflict. "Laura, you're early. Everything all right?" he asked, masking the worry that had begun to settle in his chest. Laura forced a smile. "Just thought I'd drop by. Thought we could talk." Maggie's eyes narrowed slightly. She had always known when something was off. An instinct told her this visit was different. There was tension in the air, a subtle heaviness that made the familiar walls of the house feel smaller. Inside, the living room carried the familiar scent of aged wood and family memories. The oak table, worn from decades of dinners and arguments, stood as a silent witness. Ethan, the younger sibling, entered quietly, clutching a small sketchbook. At 38, he had become sensitive and reflective, often feeling overlooked amidst the family's swirl of personalities. He avoided Maggie's gaze, yet she noticed the slight tremble in his hands. Maggie cleared her throat, a signal both gentle and commanding. "Sit down, both of you. Tell me why you're here." Laura exchanged a glance with Ethan. It was brief, loaded with unspoken words. Maggie could feel the tension coil around them like a tightening rope. There was a secret in the air, one that had been simmering for years, now threatening to spill over. For a moment, the house was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Maggie thought of the years she had held this family together with gentle rules and firm boundaries. She thought of the little arguments that had escalated, the apologies that had gone unspoken, and the moments when silence had been the only shield. And then Laura spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Mom, Dad, there's something we need to discuss. Something about Ethan, and about the house." Maggie felt her heart skip a beat. She had sensed it, the arrival of a long-buried truth. Henry's hands gripped the edge of his chair. Ethan's eyes flickered toward the floor. The air seemed to thicken, as if the house itself held its breath. It was a moment Maggie had anticipated in some ways, but dreaded in others. The kind of moment that could either heal a family or fracture it forever. And in that pause, before any words were spoken, Maggie knew nothing would ever be the same again.
Laura's words hung in the air like smoke, twisting and curling around the room. Maggie's hands tightened in her lap, her knitting forgotten. Henry's knuckles whitened as he gripped the chair arms. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, the sketchbook now resting forgotten on the coffee table. Laura's words hung in the air like smoke, twisting and curling around the room. Maggie's hands tightened in her lap, her knitting forgotten. Henry's knuckles whitened as he gripped the chair arms. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, the sketchbook now resting forgotten on the coffee table. "Mom, Dad," Laura began again, her voice steadier this time, but carrying a weight that made the walls feel smaller. "It's about the house and what we inherited. And Ethan, it's about him too." Maggie's brow furrowed. "Inheritance? Ethan? What are you saying?" Her voice was calm, but inside her mind raced. For decades she had believed that the family's affairs were orderly, that secrets were tucked neatly away, but now the air felt heavy with the promise of chaos. Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "Mom, Dad, I didn't mean for it to happen. I thought I could handle it, but..." His voice broke. "I borrowed money from the wrong people, and now they're threatening us. They want the house." Silence. Maggie felt the room tilt slightly, as if the floor itself had shifted. Henry's mouth opened, closed, and then he whispered, "Ethan, what have you done?" I didn't want to worry anyone. I thought I could fix it myself. But they're serious. They're coming, and they won't wait." Maggie felt a cold wave run through her chest. Her lifelong rule had always been protect the family, shield them from the outside world. But now, the danger wasn't just financial. It was personal, immediate, and terrifying. Laura leaned forward. "Mom? Dad? We can't just sit here. We have to act. I've tried to negotiate, but they won't listen. They're already planning to take the house tomorrow if we don't—" Maggie's mind raced, but she forced herself to breathe. Years of experience, of handling crises large and small, came rushing back. She remembered the nights she stayed up, making decisions that kept the family safe. And now it was time again. "Ethan, tell me everything, every detail," Maggie said, her voice steady but fierce. "We'll figure this out, together. No one threatens this family without consequences." Ethan's relief was visible, but only slightly. "I'll tell you everything, Mom, but you have to promise me no one leaves this house until we're safe." Maggie nodded. "No one leaves, not until we know exactly what we're dealing with." The family sat together, the weight of truth pressing down on them, each aware that the hours ahead would test their bonds like never before. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the driveway. And in those shadows, Maggie could almost see the danger approaching, a reminder that the world outside their walls was no longer distant. The first step was clear: uncover the full story, plan carefully, and brace for what was coming. But Maggie knew, deep in her bones, that the most difficult part wouldn't be the threat outside. It would be the secrets that were finally surfacing, and the choices her family would have to make in the face of fear.
The next morning, the house felt different, charged, almost vibrating with tension. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that the walls themselves were listening, watching. She moved from room to room, checking doors, windows, anything that could give them a slight edge. Every creak of the floorboard, every whisper of the wind made her heart race. Henry tried to keep busy, making breakfast as if normalcy could shield them. But the lines around his eyes were deeper today, shadows cast by sleepless nights and worry. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you really think they'll come?" "They might," Maggie replied, her voice calm but firm. "And if they do, we need to be ready. We've handled storms before, Henry. This is no different, just sharper." Ethan stayed near the front window, eyes scanning the street. His hands fidgeted with the sketchbook, a nervous tic that Maggie had noticed over the years. "Mom, Laura, they're here," he whispered. Laura moved closer, her face pale but determined. "We stick to the plan. We don't panic. They may have threats, but they don't know this house like we do." A black SUV rolled slowly down the driveway, engine purring low like a predator circling. Maggie felt her pulse tighten. The vehicle stopped, and two men stepped out. Their posture was confident, almost casual, but their eyes betrayed something dangerous. Maggie's hand found Henry's. "Stay calm," she whispered. Inside, though, her mind raced. Every story she had heard about threats to families flashed through her memory, every newspaper article, every TV story about greed and desperation. She had to stay one step ahead. The men approached the front door, their footsteps heavy on the porch. Ethan's face went pale. They're asking for the house."
Maggie stepped forward. "They're not getting it," she said, her voice steady, controlled. "This is our home. Our family lives here. You may threaten us, but we will not give in." The taller man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're not here for threats, Mrs. Collins," he said, voice smooth but chilling. "We're here for results. You have 1 hour to come up with a solution, or things get complicated." Maggie's mind clicked into overdrive. They couldn't call the police. Ethan's mistakes had layers she wasn't fully aware of. But they could use what they knew, the house itself, and their family's cohesion as leverage. She turned to Laura and Henry, whispering fast instructions. "Block the back exits. Keep Ethan calm. I'll talk to them. Remember, nothing provokes them unnecessarily." The minutes dragged, stretching longer than hours. Maggie opened the door, stepping into the morning light with the poise of someone who had faced far worse. "Gentlemen," she began, "you will leave when you understand that this family is not so easily shaken. Sit, let's talk." The SUV loomed behind them like a shadow. Inside the house, every creak seemed louder, every breath heavier. And Maggie knew, as the first real confrontation began, that the choices made in these next few minutes could change the Collins family forever. Outside, the world felt like it had paused. Inside, the storm had arrived.
The air inside the Collins living room was thick, almost suffocating. Maggie motioned for the men to sit. Every chair they touched, every step they took seemed deliberate, like chess pieces moving across a board. She could feel Laura and Henry behind her, tense but ready. Ethan clutched his sketchbook like a shield, eyes darting from one shadow to another. The taller man leaned back, arms crossed. "You don't understand, Mrs. Collins," he said. "We're not here for pleasantries. This is business. One wrong move and the consequences are yours." Maggie's eyes met his. "Business?" she asked, voice steady, controlled. "The way you see it, maybe. But to us, this is our family, our home, our life. You cross that line, and you're not dealing with paperwork. You're dealing with us." A tense silence followed. Outside, the black SUV waited like a silent predator. Inside, the clock ticked louder than it ever had. The taller man's lips curled into a thin smile. "Brave words, but talk doesn't stop reality. You have an hour." Maggie's mind raced. 1 hour to protect her family, her home, and everything they'd built. She gestured subtly to Laura and Henry, signaling them to follow the plan she had prepared weeks ago, every precaution, every hidden exit, every small advantage she could leverage. Henry whispered, almost to himself, "Mom, what if it fails?" Maggie knelt, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It won't. We've survived worse. You trust me, don't you?" He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, Mom." Laura adjusted a stack of files on the coffee table, a bluff, a decoy. "You see," Maggie continued, her voice calm but razor-sharp, "this house isn't just walls and furniture. It's history, memories, and the strength of a family that refuses to break. You want results? Start by respecting that." The shorter man sneered. "We're not interested in speeches. We want what's due." Maggie leaned closer, voice low but deadly serious. "Then you need to understand something very clearly. Anyone who tries to take from this family without reason will leave with nothing. Not just empty hands, they'll leave with the lesson that the Collins house, the Collins family, is not a target." A flicker of hesitation crossed their faces, subtle, but enough for Maggie to sense the shift. She pressed on, calm, unwavering, every word carefully chosen. "You've underestimated us, and that's a mistake you won't make twice." The taller man's eyes narrowed. "You're clever.
I'll give you that. But cleverness won't protect you forever. Maggie stood straight, unyielding. It won't have to. You'll leave before you ever get the chance. The clock ticked down. Seconds felt like hours. And in that quiet, tense space, the Collins family's resolve became a weapon stronger than fear, more unyielding than any threat. Outside, the SUV engine rumbled. Inside, the first real battle of wits, courage, and survival had begun. And Maggie knew that the next move, hers or theirs, would determine everything.
The sound of the SUV's engine outside was a constant reminder. Time was running out. Maggie could feel her heart pounding, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. Every family member moved like clockwork, silent but precise. Laura and Henry had their roles memorized. Ethan clutched his sketchbook tightly, ready to use it as a distraction if needed. The taller man stepped forward again, his presence looming over the room like a dark cloud. "You think you've prepared for everything?" he asked, voice cold, sharp. "You're wrong. This family is about to learn just how fragile it really is." Maggie smiled faintly. "Fragile," she repeated, her tone calm but edged with steel. "No one underestimates the Collins family and walks away unscathed. You may have your plans, but we've had months to plan ours." Suddenly, Laura flicked a hidden switch under the coffee table. A soft click, barely noticeable, but enough to trigger the first part of Maggie's countermeasure. The lights in the living room flickered, casting long shadows that made the intruders hesitate. "What did you do?" the shorter man stammered, stepping back. Maggie took a step forward, unwavering. "What you didn't expect. You came here thinking you could intimidate a family, but you walked straight into a trap. And traps, gentlemen, are only as dangerous as the minds that set them." Henry moved quickly, slipping some old, seemingly harmless floorboards aside. Underneath, a narrow path led to a hidden basement passage. "Mom, they're looking right at us," he whispered. Maggie nodded. "Good. Let's make them think they have the advantage. Then we strike." The taller man glanced around, uncertainty flickering across his features. "You're playing a dangerous game. And you," Maggie said, her eyes blazing, "are about to lose it." Ethan, the quietest of the three siblings, suddenly dropped his sketchbook. It hit the floor with a loud thud, drawing the intruder's attention. In that split second, Maggie signaled Laura, and the hidden basement door swung open. Confusion spread like wildfire. The intruders realized too late that the Collins family had planned for every step. The clever switch, the distraction, the hidden passage. It wasn't luck. It was strategy. The tension in the room reached its peak. Every second stretched, every heartbeat amplified. Outside, the world waited. Inside, a family was ready to fight, not with fists, but with brains, bravery, and an unbreakable bond. The basement door slammed shut behind Maggie, and the intruders realized, too late, that the Collins family wasn't just defending, they were hunting. "Split up," the taller man barked, his voice laced with panic. But splitting up in a house full of traps and hidden passages was exactly what Maggie had been counting on. Ethan slipped silently down the side hallway, sketchbook in hand, but now serving a new purpose. He used the pages to guide a laser-triggered alarm system Maggie had installed months ago, catching the intruders in a web of sudden, blinding lights. Their shadows danced frantically across the walls, disoriented. "Mom, they're confused," Henry whispered from the staircase above. "Good," Maggie replied, her calm voice betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Confusion makes them predictable." The shorter man lunged toward Henry, trying to regain control, but Laura, agile and sharp, slammed a heavy vase from the mantel with precision, forcing him backward into a corner. "Not today," she hissed. Outside, the SUV's engine roared, but its driver hesitated, sensing something wasn't right. Maggie had anticipated reinforcements.
Every move, every escape route had been accounted for. The taller intruder charged toward Maggie, but she sidestepped effortlessly, leading him straight into a preset net trap. He crashed to the ground with a grunt, immobilized. Maggie stood over him, eyes steady. You underestimated a mother and a family united. Henry, now at the side door, triggered another trap, a cascade of falling lights and loud alarms that disoriented the remaining intruder further. Ethan's sketchbook pages fluttered in the chaos, a distraction and a symbol of the family's clever planning. The intruders were trapped, cornered, and for the first time truly afraid. The Collins family's strategy, patience, and unity had turned the tables completely. Maggie looked at her children, pride shining through exhaustion. "Remember this moment," she said, voice low but commanding. "This is what family does. We protect, we fight, we survive, together." The intruders, now restrained and overwhelmed, could only stare. The Collins family had taken what they thought was a simple break-in and transformed it into a lesson in control, courage, and consequence. Finally, the distant wail of police sirens filled the night, growing louder. The intruders were about to face the law, but the Collins family didn't need the law to feel victorious. They had each other, and that bond was stronger than any fear or threat. Maggie exhaled slowly, tension leaving her shoulders. Tonight, we didn't just survive, we reclaimed our home, and anyone who ever thinks of threatening us will think twice. The house was quiet now, filled only with the heavy breaths of a family who had fought not with hatred, but with intelligence, unity, and unwavering courage. Outside, the world continued, oblivious to the drama inside. But inside, the Collins family had written their own ending. And as they looked around their living room, battered but intact, one truth remained: a family united can withstand anything, and anyone who dares challenge it will pay the price.
The police lights faded in the driveway, leaving the Collins house bathed in the soft glow of the street lamps. Inside, the chaos had ended, but the tension still lingered like a heavy curtain. Maggie sank into the worn leather couch, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from relief. Henry and Ethan flopped beside her, exhausted but smiling faintly. Laura, usually the most composed, leaned against the mantel, quietly wiping away a tear. "Mom," Henry whispered, his voice breaking the silence, "I never realized how much you planned, how much all of you thought ahead." Maggie reached out and ruffled his hair, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. "Sometimes you don't realize the strength you have until the world forces it out of you." Ethan held up his sketchbook, pages still scattered from the chaos. "And sometimes what seems useless can save everything." Laura nodded. "I guess family is more than just being together. It's strategy, patience, and trust." The fire and the hearth flickered, casting long shadows across the room, but now those shadows didn't frighten them. They felt like guardians. The house had survived, and more importantly, so had their bond. Maggie stood and walked to the window, peering out at the quiet street. The intruders will face consequences, yes, but tonight wasn't about punishment. It was about showing ourselves what we're capable of, together. Henry glanced around, still catching his breath. I think I understand now. The world is scary, but we don't have to face it alone." Ethan, ever the observer, smiled softly. "And sometimes the people who think they're in control aren't." Maggie turned toward them, her expression softening. "Exactly. Control isn't about fear or power. It's about love, loyalty, and knowing that no matter what, we stand together."
The family settled back on the couch, shoulders touching, hearts finally slowing from the adrenaline. Outside, the night was calm again, the sirens gone, leaving only the familiar hum of the neighborhood. The house was still, safe, and theirs. Laura finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think we'll ever forget tonight?" Maggie shook her head with a faint smile. "We'll remember it, yes, but not with fear, with pride. Pride in ourselves and in each other." And in that quiet living room, the Collins family discovered a truth far more powerful than any alarm system, trap, or plan. No intruder, no danger, no threat could ever break what they had built together. As the night stretched on, they laughed softly at small mishaps, shared whispered memories, and allowed themselves the luxury of peace. They were stronger, closer, and wiser than before, and as the first light of dawn touched the roof, it painted their faces with hope. Tonight was a battle, yes, but tomorrow was theirs.
The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, filling the Collins home with a warmth that felt almost sacred. The chaos of last night seemed like a distant memory, yet the lessons it left behind were vivid and unshakable. Maggie stood at the kitchen counter making coffee, while Henry and Ethan shuffled in, still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Laura quietly joined them, carrying the stack of papers and evidence they had collected. "I can't believe how everything unfolded," Henry said, his voice soft but reflective. "It felt like we were in one of those old TV dramas Mom used to watch." Maggie smiled knowingly. "Life doesn't give us scripts, Henry. We improvise, we adapt, and sometimes we find out we're stronger than we ever imagined." Ethan glanced at the window, watching the morning joggers and neighbors walking their dogs. "And even when danger comes knocking, it doesn't have to tear us apart. It can teach us how to stand taller, how to protect what matters." Laura set down the papers and placed her hands on the table. "I think the biggest takeaway is trust, in each other, in ourselves, in the bond we share. Without that, none of our planning, none of our courage would have mattered." Maggie nodded, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Exactly. Trust is the foundation of a family. Love is the cement that holds it together. And resilience is what lets us face tomorrow, no matter what it brings." There was a moment of quiet, the kind that settles deep into the bones. Outside, life was moving on. Mail carriers, children on bicycles, the distant hum of cars, but inside, the Collins family felt a calm that was earned, not given. Henry finally spoke, a small smile forming on his lips. "I think we'll remember last night not for the fear or the chaos, but for what we discovered about ourselves, about each other." Ethan added, "And maybe, just maybe, we can use this strength for more than defending our home, to face everything life throws at us, together." Maggie poured herself a cup of coffee, inhaling the rich aroma. Yes, together. That's the most powerful thing in the world. Not the locks, not the alarms, not even the law. Just family. Laura nodded, her eyes bright. "And tonight, when we look back, we won't see darkness. We'll see light. Our light, shining even in the hardest moments." The family shared a quiet laugh, soft but genuine, the kind that comes from relief and newfound appreciation. Outside, the world went on as usual, unaware of the storm that had passed through the Collins home. And in that simple morning ritual, coffee, conversation, laughter, they realized, no matter the challenges ahead, they had discovered something that would never fade: the unbreakable strength of family, trust, and love. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden streaks across the walls, Maggie looked at her family and whispered softly, "We've survived, we've learned,
and we will thrive. Together. Always. And with that, the Collins family faced the day, not as victims, not as survivors, but as a unit stronger than ever before, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Weeks had passed since the night that changed everything for the Collins family. Life had settled into a rhythm again, though a rhythm now colored by newfound understanding. The tension, the fear, the chaos, they were memories, but the lessons they brought were permanent. Maggie sat in her favorite armchair, knitting quietly while the TV played in the background. Henry was tending the garden, carefully pruning roses that had struggled through the summer heat. Ethan and Laura sat together at the kitchen table, reviewing college applications and work projects, their laughter floating through the house. Maggie reflected on the journey. It's strange, she thought aloud, how the hardest nights can teach us the most about who we really are, and about who we can become, together. Henry, overhearing her, smiled. I feel that too. We faced fear, uncertainty, even betrayal. And yet, here we are, stronger, closer, more connected than ever. Ethan added, I think what really matters isn't what we lost or what almost happened. It's what we gained, perspective, courage, and a deeper love for each other. Laura, looking around the room, nodded thoughtfully. Life isn't perfect, and we'll still face challenges, but now we know we can handle them, together. And that knowledge, it's priceless. Maggie put down her knitting and reached for the family photo on the mantel. A picture taken years ago, before the chaos, before the crisis, but now it felt more meaningful than ever. This, she said softly, reminds me that family isn't just about blood or history. It's about standing by each other, even in the storms. It's about resilience, trust, and love. The sun was setting outside, casting warm amber hues across the room. The family gathered on the porch, sipping tea, watching the sky turn from gold to deep violet. They shared stories, laughter, and comfortable silences, the kind only families with deep bonds can share. Maggie whispered, almost to herself, the storms will come. They always do. But so will the mornings. And as long as we face them together, there's nothing we can't overcome. Henry looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet pride. That's right. And maybe the greatest strength we have isn't in what we do, but in how we stay together. The twilight deepened, and the house settled into a gentle quiet. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the trials and triumphs inside. But inside the Collins home, the family knew something essential. They were unbreakable, grounded not just by walls and locks, but by love, trust, and the courage to face whatever came next. As stars began to pepper the night sky, Maggie smiled, holding the moment in her heart. The Collins family had endured. They had grown. And above all, they had discovered the eternal power of togetherness, a power that would carry them forward, always.
Months passed since the Collins family weathered their storm. Life had returned to its familiar rhythms, but something subtle and profound had shifted in the household. Each corner of the home seemed to echo lessons learned, not just about survival, but about love, patience, and the quiet strength found in togetherness. Maggie walked through the garden early one morning, sunlight warming her shoulders. The roses Henry had pruned after the crisis were blooming brighter than ever. She realized that, like the garden, family relationships require care, attention, and sometimes tough pruning to thrive. Henry joined her, carrying a small tray with coffee. You know, he said, we may have faced challenges we never expected, but I think we came out of it stronger than ever. Maggie nodded. It's true. I never imagined how much courage, patience, and understanding we'd discover in ourselves and in each other.
Inside, Ethan and Laura were working together on a charity project for the local community, a shared effort that had grown from the empathy and perspective they gained during the family crisis. Their laughter floated through the house, a sound both familiar and deeply comforting. Maggie reflected quietly. We've learned that life isn't perfect, and families aren't perfect. But the strength of a family isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by resilience, by loyalty, and by the willingness to face even the hardest days together. Henry added, and that resilience becomes a legacy, not just for us, but for generations to come. Our children, our grandchildren, they'll grow knowing that love and trust can survive storms, that courage is contagious, and that unity can conquer fear. The family gathered once again in the living room, a place that had seen their tears, their fears, and now their quiet triumphs. The photo albums were open, full of memories old and new. They shared stories, reminisced, and celebrated the ordinary moments that had become extraordinary in the light of their journey. As evening descended, the sky painted with warm hues of sunset, Maggie whispered, "No matter what happens, this, our family, is our home, our strength, our heart." And Henry took her hand gently. And that's something no challenge, no betrayal, no crisis can ever take away. Outside, the world continued on, unaware of the trials they had overcome. But inside, the Collins family understood something timeless. Love, trust, and unity are the pillars that hold a family together long after the storms have passed. The house grew quiet, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Maggie, Henry, Ethan, and Laura sat together, not needing words, just the comfort of presence. In that stillness, they knew one thing for certain. Whatever the future might hold, they would face it together, stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. And in that truth, there was peace.